The United States corporate-controlled government understands that humane, common-sense, worker-centric policies are incredibly appealing to the average person, including Americans. U.S. leadership does not want to run the risk of a successful, left-wing economy growing large enough to offer the world an alternative to destructive, genocidal capitalism. But trying to influence the outcome of elections will only get you so far. If you really want to throw a wrench in things, you need to take a more aggressive approach. This is where the US really shines. You've probably seen this infographic floating around online. It's a little outdated at this point, and doesn't even include all the US's interventions, but the fact that the United States, the supposed defender of freedom and democracy, has engaged in at least 56 military interventions in Latin America since 1890 is insane. When casting doubt on an election outcome just isn't enough, the imperial powers have some other tricks up their sleeve. The favorites of the United States are fomenting coups, funding right-wing death squads, and sending in the CIA or paramilitary groups to cause as much chaos and disarray as possible. The list is far too long to cover in depth, but let's take a look at just a couple of the more well-known examples. We'll start with Chile.
Tuesday, September the 11th. Out of an early autumn sky, two jets launch a deadly attack on a potent symbol of democracy and freedom in a nation's capital. The result is fire, suicide, and ultimately the death or disappearance of over 3,000 people. Shockwaves are felt around the world. This is the story of one day in September.
Since the early 1930s, Chile had been a shining example of democracy and political stability in Latin America. All of that came to a screeching halt in September of 1973. Salvador Allende, a physician and socialist politician, had been elected president in September of 1970, making him the first Marxist to hold the office of president in a Latin American liberal democracy. The United States didn't like that. Allende had served his country in various government positions for over 40 years before ascending to the presidency. And as president, his platform included nationalizing key industries, improving and expanding education, and improving the living conditions of the working class. These common-sense policies made him quite popular among the Chilean people, though decidedly less popular with the right-wing parties that controlled other parts of the government, and even less popular with the United States, which had begun actively plotting to overthrow the democratically elected Chilean president and install a puppet dictator. These plans came to fruition on September 11, 1973. The Chilean military, supported and advised by the CIA, laid siege to the presidential palace. Allende vowed he would not leave, and instead broadcast what would become his final speech to his fellow Chileans, an inspiring call to never give up and look towards a brighter future free from oppression.
From inside the palace, Allende refused to leave, true to his promise not to surrender the government for which the ordinary people of Chile had voted. He broadcast this last message, then he shot himself.
Trabajadores de mi patria, tengo fe en Chile y su destino. Sigan ustedes sabiendo que mucho más temprano que tarde, de nuevo, abrirán las grandes alamedas por donde pase el hombre libre para construir una sociedad mejor. ¡Viva Chile! ¡Viva el pueblo! ¡Vivan los trabajadores!
Allende took his own life rather than let the US-backed coup plotters capture him. After the military seized power, General Augusto Pinochet established a military dictatorship, which would remain in place until 1990, crippling the Chilean economy and destroying all the progress made by Allende's socialist initiatives. You've probably seen right-wingers make references to pushing their political opponents out of helicopters. They're referring to Chile under Pinochet. It was common during that bloody period for the military to kidnap dissidents, take them up in helicopters, and throw them out, typically over the water, and usually with their stomachs cut open, so that their bodies would sink. At Pinochet's direction, thousands of Chileans were tortured, executed, or disappeared. All of this was the result of the United States and their genocidal commitment to ensuring no economic system could ever offer an alternative to capitalism. Let's look at another example, Nicaragua. After the revolution, during which the socialist Sandinistas overthrew the Somoza dictatorship in 1979, the United States once again set its sights on Latin America. The US had originally intended to work out some kind of agreement with Nicaragua, but when the country chose to side with the global socialist movement and work with Cuba and the Soviet Union instead, the US quickly changed its approach. As with Chile, US leadership was completely unwilling to allow a budding left-wing economy to grow to eventually challenge the myth of capitalist superiority. They feared a socialist movement, a genuinely democratic movement, unlike the facade of democracy we have in the US, would inspire revolutions throughout Latin America. In December of 1981, Reagan authorized covert operations in Nicaragua. These operations would eventually include funding, arming, and training what were called the Contras, groups dedicated to overthrowing the new government. Among the equipment provided by the CIA were instruments of torture and assassination, one of the more egregious actions that earned the United States a slap on the wrist for violation of international law was the CIA's production and distribution of a manual titled Psychological Operations in Guerrilla Warfare. This guidebook, which the CIA distributed to their loyal right-wing death squads, encouraged the assassination of certain targets, including non-military personnel like judges, police officers, and government officials. It also encouraged the inciting of riots and shootings which would result in the death of selected members of the Contras themselves, with the aim of turning them into martyrs and thereby building support for the Contra cause. The United States would continue to sow chaos in Nicaragua for years, amassing a death toll of over 50,000 people and destroying the popular democratic movement. These are just two examples from one region. In Latin America alone, the United States has launched at least 56 military interventions in recent memory. And don't make the mistake of assuming that's all in the past. It still happens. The Venezuelan police captured a group of American coup plotters just last year. And as we speak, we're witnessing a surge of right-wing opposition to the democratic election of socialist candidate Pedro Castillo in Peru. It is absolutely guaranteed those factions are working with US intelligence agencies to undermine the democratic process and prevent socialism from gaining any ground. Latin America represents the front lines in the fight to throw off the yoke of capitalism and build a brighter, freer future, without the oppression of the United States or the other imperialist powers. It is essential that Western socialists support these struggles for self-determination. But Latin America isn't the only target. We've also seen decades of coups and attempted nation-building by the US in the Middle East and in Asia. There's a reason the United States is running 24/7 propaganda operations and has over 400 military bases surrounding China, a country that routinely supports growing socialist movements in other countries. So, when US officials claim that we don't meddle in foreign elections, that we do what we do for the sake of defending democracy and freedom, understand that they're lying to you, and they know it. The United States does not defend democracy abroad. We don't even have real democracy at home. American leadership has lied about socialism for over a century. And if you don't believe me, read the CIA's own words on Stalin, saying that the Western conception of communism is wrong, and that the Soviet Union did indeed have collective leadership, as opposed to the strongman dictator myth that American leadership peddles to this day. If we want our children and grandchildren to actually experience freedom and democracy, we have to start today.